Hey, Francis.
Hello. So, hello, I'd like to welcome my guest today, my dear friend Anthony Tayyoun, co-founder and COO of Dexai Robotics. So, hello, Anthony, and nice background, by the way. I see Alfred ruling the kitchen.
Thanks, Francis. Yeah, you can see Alfred's first foray into the kitchen here.
To be clear, Alfred is the product of your company.
That's correct.
Yeah. So, Anthony, you started your career as a consultant with the Boston Consulting Group. You come basically from an engineering background and you hold an MBA from Harvard Business School. And now you are the COO slash CFO slash co-founder. I don't know if I get it right. So
Yeah,
what is
as
exactly that you do?
early stage companies, you have to wear a lot of hats. So yeah, those are the roles I'm currently doing at Dexai.
All right. That's intense, I think. So, Anthony, tell us a little bit more first about Dexai in terms of like what's the industry or sector that it belongs to, and what market are you like targeting, and a little bit more about your product or Alfred.
Great. So Dexai Robotic is a food service automation company. We provide automation for the food service industry, and we're starting with this assembly-based product. So we built Alfred, which is a plug-and-play automation solution for food service operators, such as quick service restaurants, universities, caterers, really anywhere where delicious food is served. And the way the product works is it's a plug-and-play solution that works in existing kitchens without having to change anything from the layout or the processes that you already have. So imagine a Sweetgreen or a Chipotle or really a salad buffet line or anywhere where food is served. You would put Alfred on existing kitchen equipment. You don't have to pay any upfront capital investment. And then Alfred uses its camera on its wrist to identify the ingredients in the space. And then it picks up utensils such as spoons, ladles, dishes, and scoops and builds the recipe, be it a salad, a bowl, really anything that needs to be scooped or picked.
Oh, so it seems Alfred got the whole package. But let me ask in this context, okay, what are the strengths of Alfred specifically compared to other, robots in the market? Because robotic
Yep.
industry is booming right now. So strengths of Alfred specifically.
Great question. From a technological standpoint, I think of it in three different categories. So you have the vision, the computer vision or the perception. And this is everything related to Alfred's camera, allowing it to see food in real time and know where it is. Two, it's path planning. So going from point A to point B on a robot. And three, it's the manipulation of materials. So being able to scoop avocado or guacamole from a bin, pick tomatoes and olives and that type of interactions. The first one, I'd say the first two were really one of maybe 10 or 15 companies that can do what we can do, or groups in the world. And then on the last point about manipulating deformable materials, we're really the only company that can do this using robotics in today's world for a wide variety of reasons. And from a consumer perspective, though, the edge here is that it's a truly plug and play solution that can adapt to your existing setup and without you having to change anything. So most other food service or really any automation solution requires you to fundamentally change your process or your layout or your setting, whereas Alfred is really a drop-in solution similar to how you would use a
It can
microwave.
adapt anywhere, right? Anywhere in any place.
Exactly.
So
And
the
for
adaptability.
us, most of what we do is on the software side. So the hardware itself, the robot and all of these components are commodity, off-the-shelf existing equipment. And what we do is software, which allows us to do a lot of interesting things on the business model side, but also provide more functionality to the robot. So for example, we're starting with scooping, but then we can very easily add grilling, frying, and operating other kitchen equipment.
All right. That's really impressive. I'm impressed by Alfred.
Thank you.
Already. So, and if we talk like in this situation, the given situation that we live in nowadays, the COVID-19, how how it affected the industries, and how some of them are thriving,
Yeah.
surprisingly, and while others are having a hard time even surviving this phase. So, in this situation, where do you stand during this stage? Like, do you see some long-term threats for this business of yours?
Yeah, I think the demand has increased dramatically since COVID, but the reason for that demand changed slightly. So we saw two or three things that changed because of COVID. One, there's a huge focus on safety, both safety of the consumer and people eating the food, but also
Yeah.
the safety of the employees in the kitchen. And
People are
so
more aware of the food safety now.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so for a restaurant operator or a food service operator, their biggest worry before COVID was how do we hire and retain employees. Today it became how do we keep those employees and our customers safe, right? So that problem is still there. That need for automation is still there, but the reason changed slightly. Now, the other thing that we've observed is that technology implementations that used to take 3 years are now happening in 3 months, right? So there's this huge acceleration on the food service industry side, which is really great because this industry is known to be pretty stagnant and slow to adopt technology. And so that's accelerating a lot. Having said all of that, I think there's a little bit of reluctance from the front lines, especially now because employees are still grappling to implement some of the early COVID measures. So things like make sure you test people's temperature every time they come into your restaurant, make sure you sanitize all the tables, and all these things, these changes are still taking most of the mind share of these employees. And so it'll be, I would say, a little bit of time before we start seeing a lot of very rapid adoption on the technology side for different technologies in the kitchen.
I can see, but maybe when we get to a place where these changes become like stagnant, not we don't have many
That's
new
stable.
inputs, we can go ahead and
Exactly.
start with all of this. Okay, so today's main topic is the innovation measurement.
Mhm.
And speaking of startups and new businesses, we cannot ignore the innovation part of it, and especially in the robotics field. And to for sure you will have innovation management in a way, and to have innovation management you have to have innovation measurements, because what can be measured can be managed. So in this context, many executives and managers of today's business life look up to the leaders in their respective industries, or the biggest companies in their respective industries, and they try to imitate them or be like as innovative as them. But in your case, and as a startup, who do you compare Dexai to? Or in other words, how do you benefit from the already established players in the market? So how do you do that in your case?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think for us we draw a lot of inspiration from successful and important brands out there in the field. I think two particular examples that come to mind when you talk about companies that we look forward to or we look up to are Smeg and OXO, both of which create kitchen tools. So Smeg is the company behind very many iconic fridges, if you
Famous
know it.
company.
Yeah, exactly. So their design style, the simplicity in their designs, and the focus on beauty out of simplicity is something that we take into account a lot. And then on the OXO
The
front,
aesthetic
also
part. So you take the aesthetic
exactly,
part of these. Okay.
exactly. OXO, for instance, is a very nice example as well of companies that we look for in terms of product design and their focus on functionality, making products foolproof and very intuitive to use is something that we borrow from a lot. So I think in the category of companies to look at and try to aspire to become like them, these are the two that come to mind immediately. The other topic I think you touched on. Sorry, do you have a question?
So aesthetics, design, and interaction, user
Exactly.
interaction, user. Okay, okay.
Exactly. So like if you look at a product from OXO, and you see the user journey there, it kind of forces you as a user to only choose what they want you to choose, right? To only interact with this product the way that they envisioned you interacting with it, by making it very simple, very intuitive to use, very easy to operate, right? And what we do, for example, for us is we pick a product, a kitchen product, every week in our all hands team company-wide meeting, and someone goes over one of these products and talks about what's nice about them from a user standpoint, from a functionality standpoint, so that we all learn from it as a company.
I see.
The other interesting thing you touched on innovation management and how we measure it. We have a couple of different ways to measure innovation at Dexai. Is this something you want me to dive deeper on, or?
We will get to it in a bit. We'll get to it in a bit. Yeah. So, and I'm going to base my next questions based on the article. It's called Creating Better Innovation Measurement Practices from the MIT Sloan Management Review. And according to the article, innovation is in some cases measured as a result, or as the end product. And in some other cases, measurements are performed on the process itself that is being used. And in addition, we have some businesses that measure innovation by the volume of generated ideas or by the volume of investments in innovative projects. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess that highly depends on the industry or the innovation itself. So as a disruptive innovation business manager, what do you say is the optimum innovation measurement tactic to use in your firm?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things at play here, and I think most of it is connected to how the product or whatever you're working on, your work output solves a real problem in the world, right? And the more and the better you solve that problem, I think that's really, at the end of the day, what really matters. And that depends on who your customer is, and the customer could be a research scientist somewhere. It could be also the public. It could be a B2B customer, right? So it varies. On our side, we do a combination of things. I think a very important and helpful tool is intellectual property. So we filed, for example, on our inventions for 12 patents on inventions that we've made. And that's an interesting external validation to how much innovation.
Patents for you?
Exactly.
For the software?
Correct. But between software and hardware.
Wow. Okay.
The tools particularly, and you can see it a little bit behind me here, the utensils that the robot used, the modifications we've made to them is something we've patented as well.
It's magnetic based or?
No, so this one is mechanical motions, but we might be adding some magnetic interactions to it as well. So far, it's peg and hole mechanic motion.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, so patents are a really good, helpful external validator of how innovative you are, but they rarely tell the full story, right? A lot of times the patents are one particular way to look at things. Another one or two things that we track internally is, and that's something you mentioned, is the volume of generated ideas and prototypes. And then the third thing would be the length to prototype. So for us, we use a very particular tactic called design thinking. It's pretty well known and used heavily in industrial design. Okay. And what this means is, for a given problem, you start by diverging and getting as many solutions out there and suggestions as possible. So everyone from the team contributes, every idea counts. You throw as many ideas as you can. The next step would be to converge all of these ideas. So you look at all of them, you take out what are the common threads in there, what are some interesting problems or sub-problems that you can identify out of this. You converge into a smaller set of solutions, and then you repeat that process again and again. So from that smaller subset, You then diverge again and then converge again until you converge on one particular solution that is the best solution. And we measure both the width, so how many ideas are we getting at each stage, and the length, so how fast are we getting from one step to the next.
Processing the ideas. All right.
Exactly.
Okay. So that design thinking seems like a very powerful tool. So I think this we can elaborate a little bit more about this specific tool that you use design thinking. How exactly, after you process these ideas, is it like brainstorming and then you pick an idea and you go for it, or it it keeps converging and diverging in a way that you might select many ideas and go parallel with parallel projects. I mean, can we elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of literature on how you conduct design thinking approaches, and it's really, there are some things that are very, very important and you have to have them. So, for example, at the divergent stage, no criticism is allowed, right? So, like, everyone needs to throw in all the ideas they have. No idea is too good or too bad. Everything has to stick. You have to put as many ideas as you can. Ideally,
Welcome
the
all
more
the ideas that are possible.
Exactly. And ideally, the more you draw, the better. So using visuals is much easier than using text. A lot of people suggest putting sticky notes on a whiteboard so that you can rearrange them later. So that's the first phase. And at this phase, again, what's important is every idea counts, make it more visual, bring as many ideas as possible, and be fluid in your thought, right? So like you can move things around and feel free to move them and shake things up. The next phase, the convergence phase, you have to be much more critical. And for that to work, you have to
Less
have a critique
flexible, I think.
culture in the company. Exactly.
Yeah.
People should not be afraid to speak up. People should not be afraid to say their opinions. You have to tease things out by going back to like first principles and knowing truly, is this solution superior to the other? Can we group solutions in a certain way? And if we group them, why are we grouping them in that particular way? Is there an aspect of the problem that they all solve, which is why we like them? Or is there something else at play here? And so at that stage, you're not only selecting one idea, you're more like identifying themes between different ideas. And sometimes you end up with 2 or 3 themes in parallel that require you to further explore them and understand even more and more elements out of them. And sometimes you land already on one branch, let's say, that you find very promising and you continue with it. So there's no one single answer, but you need different requirements for every stage.
I see. So I think that at this point we can safely state that measuring innovation is not an exact science, and it is governed by so many variables.
Yep.
And managers, and we know that managers make mistakes while trying to set up the procedures of such measurement.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you this question by first quoting the article and Albert Einstein, that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So managers sometimes tend to quantify every little aspect along the way to make measurements more tangible, for them to be, like real and tangible, while others consider that this measurement process is something that we cannot measure it, so it's impossible to quantify. And moreover, managers might over focus on one aspect of the business and live in this bubble of this aspect, while forgetting about the bigger picture, like forgetting about the market needs, the real needs of the market, or other aspect like that. And so this is happening in the businesses in nowadays. So what is your, maybe your personal experience with these challenges, and what is the approach at Dexai, for example?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and I'm glad you brought it up. And we think about this all the time, right? And I think the product management function and at a lot of companies is the key to answering those questions. Um, Specifically, I think the most important thing is linking it back to your audience and your customer. If it's something that your customers don't care about or care less about, then it's something that you should not prioritize as much as you
So
usually.
you're one of the customer-centric companies, you say.
Absolutely,
All
absolutely.
right. So you
And
start
look,
from
I
the
mean,
customer needs all the time.
your customer can be the a research scientist, right? That's also fine. I'm not saying your customer has to be a paying customer from the general public, right? But you absolutely have to identify who your customer is and why are you building that product for them.
Know your audience mainly. Yeah. Okay. 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 So that's your strategy at Dexai.
Yeah. So, and what this means in practice is it means you have to do a lot of usability testing with your customers. So you're trying out different features. You would do it with them. You try to interview as many of them as possible. You observe them while they interact with your product. You run A/B tests on different features, and you see uh, uh, how their engagement with each one of those options differs, right? And I'll give you a specific example with us.
Yeah.
We were at some point we had to dedicate resources either to speed the robot up more or to make it more accurate, right? So there was a clear trade-off between either you do accuracy on a percentage basis of weight or you do speed, right? And the answer there is really just different based on which customer we're talking to. So if
Yeah.
we're working with caterers and commissaries, they get charged by the pound. And so they don't care about the weight, they care about the speed, right? Because they're getting paid more if you overscoop. So that's not a problem, right? If you underscoop, it's a different issue. Whereas if you go talk to a restaurant, for example, they don't care as much about the speed, especially if they're delivering, because that's not your bottleneck. Your bottleneck is really the runner, and so or the delivery person, and so they tend to focus much more on weight because it's a cost generator for them. And so this is like a very quick example of how in the same industry, just different customers have drastically different needs, which will drive your innovation agenda.
Well, that's a very, very interesting example because, well, now we can see the difference between really the same industry, the same customers, difference between two critical aspects of
Yeah.
your job. Okay, that's a very interesting example. Uh, I'm gonna switch to some other article. In her article, The Eight Pillars of Innovation, Susan Wojcicki, the YouTube CEO,
Mm-hmm.
said that the greatest innovations are the ones we take for granted. And nurturing a culture that allows for innovation is the key. And this is a very important key feature that we're talking about here, nurturing a culture. So how would you describe nurturing culture in your company, or which type of culture you think you have at Dexai? Because apparently this is a very important concept to adopt.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I would say this is probably the most important thing in managing innovation internally. And it's very critical to get correctly, and it's very difficult to get correctly. And there's a few things. I think the first thing we mentioned earlier a little bit is nurturing this critique culture, where people are not afraid to voice out their opinions. They're not afraid to criticize things. Criticizing work is not taken personally, right? Instead,
Exactly.
it's viewed
It's a
as
very tricky
feedback.
part of the business.
Exactly, exactly. It's constructive feedback designed to help people grow and not a critique of you as a person.
Yeah.
It's right. It's just a form of feedback for you to grow and for all of us to grow. I think that's the first very, very important thing. A second cultural component we have at Dexai is seeking the truth. And what this means is we're always trying to understand at a very fundamental level why things are behaving the way they are, and so that we don't treat the symptoms and we instead treat the actual root cause.
Yeah.
We have a saying that we like to say a lot internally. Truth is one of those, we value truth, especially when it's bad, It's one of those things where bad news ages very badly, right? Unlike wine, the more you let bad news simmer and age, the worse it's going to become. And so,
Is
especially when
that
it's
one of the saying that you mentioned on your website? Because I saw
yeah,
some
yeah,
quotes.
it's one of our values. Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. We
let's
value the truth,
see some
especially when it's bad.
values.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep. And another relevant value in this case that we also have at Dexai is that nothing at Dexai is someone else's problem. Um, and that is also very telling because this means that we approach these projects collaboratively as one team. And if you think about it in the context of critique culture and in the context of truth, we all need to help each other by criticizing each other's work, picking up where others have left off, and help each other seek and find the truth together, right? And
So
so,
critique the work and not the individual
exactly, exactly.
in a constructive manner. Okay.
And in a manner that tries to seek the truth, right? And the truth could be the root cause why this problem is not, or the solution does not work. It could be why this is such a good solution. It could be any of these things and anything in between, right?
Okay. And that's very interesting. I envy your partners.
Thank you. It's again, we made all of these things together as well. So
Exactly. So, in the study that we're referring to mainly in this interview, they stated an interesting fact, and I quote: "We found that better performing companies run fewer innovation projects, but spend more time on each one. Fewer, but spend more time on each one,
mhm.
ultimately achieving successful projects at a lower cost." This is a finding, basically. And I wanted to ask you if is this a strategy that you can relate to? And more importantly, do you have the luxury of taking your time and limiting your innovation projects in the midst of all this market competition? Do you have can you relate it? Can you relate to it?
Yeah. Yes, for sure. I can relate, and it's also a difficult topic to get right. I think there's a very fine balance between having processes and checkpoints and things like that in place to make sure development doesn't go off the rails, but at the same time not having too many processes to stifle innovation. And so you need to strike a balance between those two so that you're not a prisoner of the processes you put together, but you're also not just going out of bounds all the time and remembering to focus on the vision. What we've done at Dexai is we instituted 3 or 4 milestones that are needed for every innovative project. And we start with so we have preliminary design review, then a critical design review, then a prototype and a well-defined test, and then we'll have the final release of the project. And what this helped us do is it helped us create those gating factors between the divergent and convergent steps so that we make sure we as a team are aligned on, in the preliminary design review, for example, we're aligned on why we're doing this innovation project. Which problem are we solving? What are the must-haves in the solution and what are the nice-to-haves? What can we afford to drop? What's the timeline on this project? How quickly do we need it? All these things. The critical design review looks at the specific parameters of the design and so on and so forth. But outside of that, we have no other processes to limit it because, to your point, it's um, you can become basically a prisoner of your processes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so basically you put together a structure to know how to proceed in
Yeah, like
this.
a process framework.
All right. Okay, I see. Okay. Uh, well, I have to say that's a very, very interesting and inspiring interview.
Thank you.
Uh, and before we before we end this interview, I just like to conclude this very interesting discussion by asking you to share some of your recommendations, if you may, or insights to the young entrepreneurs out there, or the business owners. What do you say for these people?
For innovation management in particular, or for
Can we split it into halves? Maybe a little bit for innovation, because this is our topic, and something, I don't know, you choose.
yeah, I think that's a tough one. On the innovation front, specifically, I encourage people to remember and think why it is so difficult for big companies to innovate, and why do big companies acquire startups many times due to get their innovations right. Why are those innovations coming from the small businesses and not from the big ones? And the first thing that would come to mind, or as the research shows, it's mostly due to the nimbleness and the ability to pivot and run things quickly as a small startup and company. And that requires a lot of the things we touched on together. So it requires you not to have very elaborate processes and very restricted things. It requires you to have more focus on a single project, and at the same time be able to diverge and converge your ideas to test a lot of things very quickly. Um, all of these things are characteristics of smaller firms that big firms don't necessarily have, even though they have more capital, bigger access to talent pools, all of these things which intuitively you would think that they can innovate more, but they don't. And so
So you're saying, for the entrepreneurs, okay, pay attention. There's something you have that huge companies don't, and they are seeking it.
exactly.
Okay, hold on to it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Double down on it, hold on to it, and remember it in every phase as you go forward.
Yeah.
Um, the general advice though for entrepreneurs is uh, that the most difficult step is the start. So do it, right. Take the jump. It's it's a very how shall I say this? It's
Agree?
if it was easy, everyone else would have done it already. So no, it is difficult, it is tough, but that's really part of the challenge. There's really something incredibly rewarding about being able to innovate and provide solutions, and addressing problems that no one else was able to address. Um, and then, having said all of that, I would say that the most important thing to focus on is culture. um, Making sure that people have the right framework to work together, are
Nurture.
thinking about things the right way, are working as colleagues and as friends, and not as employees who are showing up to do their job from 8 to 5 and then leave, right? And so that, I think, many of the things we touched on throughout this interview relate and go back to culture, and it's probably the single most important thing in having a successful startup or project.
Well, thanks a lot, Anthony. And I don't know, I can't wait to see you again in face, because the the situation right now is pretty tough, and you're based in the US and I'm in France, and we have to meet soon.
Yeah, we do. And I hope next time we meet, we can serve you some food from Alfred as well.
Well, yeah, let's hope so.
All
I'm
right.
sure that he cooks really good meals.
Oh, same perfect scoop every single time, right?
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Anthony, and see you soon.
Thanks, Francis. Bye.
Bye bye.